We're at the Iniikokaan Centre today. We're shooting our 100th podcast. And you can see in this room, all the energy's gonna happen. I can feel the rise of the prairie moonlight. Shadows trace the skyline of my hometown. Welcome to the Squeaky Wheel, folks, and we're kicking her off. Welcome, folks, to the Squeaky Wheel. You know, this is actually a pretty exciting one for me, and I always want to start off our conversations with our thoughts and prayers are going out to those affected by war, famine, political unrest, social challenges, and seemingly happening right now, a lot of devastation around the world. A few days ago, it was Truth and Reconciliation Day. And oddly, you know what's kicked off right after that is it doesn't matter where you go, you can find Halloween decorations and Christmas decorations everywhere. So that season has started as well. But right now, Lawrence and I are in the heart of downtown Calgary. We're on site at Bow Valley College, a landmark that went from starting in 1963, a dream of students, to be a vocational school, to a premier educational institution. And with us, and this is the exciting part for me, is a very good friend of mine, Michelle Fournie. Now, Michelle, before I jump into the conversation with you, and I know Lawrence, him and I, a lot of our listeners have heard from the president, and they've heard from the captain for quite a long time, and they know a lot of our stories, they know that. But I want to jump in with asking a real interesting question about your journey. But I want to lead in with a little bit about who you are. Raising two children, your niece yourself, sounds like there's a couple of animals at home, which I don't know where you came up with the name Mr. Stinky, but I as well, captain on the fire department, and you're married to a captain on the Chestermere Fire Department, and we have a great relationship with these kind of different agencies. You're one of the recipients, 40 under 40, and I've met a number of them, and you know, it takes a lot to get to that level. So that's real important to me. Co-chair of the Indigenous Gathering Place for the Society of Calgary, past co-chair of City Calgary's Indigenous Advisory Committee, government. This is almost never ending, and that's what I like so much about people who are connectors. Alberta Métis Women's Economic Security Council. You volunteer. I've seen you at a lot of our fun events, the mixers and things like that. A mentor for senior undergraduate communication students. And here's the one that I really liked, Lawrence, and actually you could probably fit into the same thing. Pancake enthusiast.
Interesting. Are there blueberries in those pancakes?
No, I don't. Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Or skatoons.
Thrift shopper, lover of all things beaded, which that I wear very proudly beside me is something that Bow Valley and yourself provided. I can't say thank you enough. And you're the manager of the Iniikokaan, where we are right now, Centre. Welcome to the Squeaky Wheel. Lawrence, invite our guest.
Yeah, I want to say thanks for having us down here at downtown Calgary. I hope our parking is paid. But
budget cuts.
No, but I like coming down here.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've certainly been a part of this advisory when Iniikokaan was first established years ago, and nice to come back. And, you know, now I sit as, you know, certainly as a board member for Rupert's Land Education, so I'm still related to Iniikokaan and what it does. And maybe you can describe some of that when you get a chance to any of our viewers out there on how we support Métis students here at Iniikokaan. And we know you're Métis, which is great. And it's nice to see a lot of us in the community working at those higher levels, right?
Well, if I can get my mom to watch and you can get your mom to watch, that's two. And we'll check with Michelle afterwards. So Lawrence and I often talk about, and the people we've gathered with to talk about is the journey. And you share your journey by your expression, by the clothes you wear, your connection with the community. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be comfortable with this, but can you guide us a little bit through, because I know our listeners always enjoy that, and the youth, your journey through the Métis community and where that awareness came from. Was it family, and how it guided you when it came to education? Like, this to us is that cornerstone of allowing us to have the conversation, to gather and talk.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. I'm a subscriber, which I'm really excited about to, be here and have you here and host you in the space. For those of you who don't know, Iniikokaan is a buffalo painted lodge. So Ini is the Blackfoot word for buffalo. And of course, it's so important to many First Nations, Métis people and original peoples of this place. And education is the new buffalo. That's some of our teaching. So that's where that's where that comes from. So Michelle Fournie, Dishnikashan, Nitanako Datsike Gunimanikikstakiaki. So my spiritual name is Center Pole Offering Woman, and my family names are Saint Denis, Lavalette, Ducharme. So I know that's a cultural introduction and something that I've really come to love about connection and kinship relations, and that's really how I found my way into centers such as this. So a long story short is really I found a lot of my culture and identity through university. So I walked into the student center with an eviction notice and a prayer that they helped Métis people.
Wow.
And so it took me about 7 years to graduate from an undergrad. And through that, I faced many significant barriers, including homelessness, food insecurity, and intergenerational trauma, mental health issues. And so it was the Student Support Center that really actually saved my life, but also changed the trajectory of my entire family because of education. And so that's why I'm choosing to give back, to this specific space of education. So contrary to popular belief is that Indigenous peoples, as we connect and reconnect to our cultures, sometimes we're learning beside the person in our class who's non-Indigenous, and so we need to see ourselves reflected in that content and also that cultural support. So it's really important for me to contribute to this space and this gathering space that is safe. There's no silly questions, come as you are. I will share with you that I had a student come in and, she looked at me and she said, do you work here? And I said, yeah, I work here. And she said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, what brought you here? And she said, I was just so scared I didn't look Indigenous enough to come to this space. And so I think it's really important as we discover identity and the diversity of culture that we have people in these spaces and that we can see ourselves in that.
Yeah, that's something a very good note to make because me sitting in a lot of these circles, one of the big crux of a lot of institutions is our Métis people kind of walk around these areas because they don't feel like they belong, or that Indigenous place is just for First Nations. But there is programming here, there's scholarships here, there are things available to us as Métis people, and sometimes we got to teach them to say that here's a role model for us that works here. Don't walk by anymore. It's time for you to go in, walk through those doors.
I love that.
I spoke at a high school a little while back, and there was a nice young girl who had asked me, how do you become comfortable when it comes to what you want to wear, or how do you engage in the community? And I know you talked a little bit about part of that journey. And I explained to her, I said, the thing to me is just show up and participate at your first event, and you will find your own way through what feels comfortable. Nobody expects you to have to wear a sash right off the bat. Nobody expects you to have to wear or understand ribbon skirts or any of that. Where did that for you begin, that you felt comfortable wearing, what we would sort of consider Métis Indigenous sort of look?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think expressions of identity, especially like gender identity expression, cultural identity expression, it's very diverse, and so for me, I do wear symbols so that people can recognize me as well, especially my sash. And I always, reach out to people. I could see them wearing their sash, and, that's cultural too, right? Where are you from? And then we have a good and we have the instant connection. But in the people that I grew up in a urban Centre, which is very different from settlement and different from reserve and different from, rural communities. And so for me, it was, there was a lot of shame in my family to talk about our indigeneity. And, even with the past week of reconciliation discussion, when I was younger, I would identify, I was to my friends and my family, I'd say, well, I'm Indigenous. And they'd say, of course we get, well, you don't look Indigenous. Yeah. How much are you? No, you're not. And so my little son, he's 6 years old. And so they were learning a lot about residential school experiences last week. And he said to his little buddy, well, I'm Indigenous. And, his little buddy said, no, you're not, right? And so that is still happening. But the thing that's different, I think, for him is that he has these reference points that I didn't have. So he can actually, he has the ability to say, but then the sash doesn't make sense. If I'm not Indigenous, the anthem doesn't make sense. And I stood in a room of 200 people and we sang it all together. But I jig and I listened to the fiddle and all of these things wouldn't make sense if I wasn't Indigenous. But for me, I just started to believe that I wasn't Indigenous enough. And it's a very complex, identity is very complex. Yeah. And especially, the expression of identity and kind of declaring. There's this chasm of I want to reconnect. I don't feel, that I deserve to. And that's one of the things about forced assimilation is that it kind of works, right? Like we're learning, to hide in plain sight, and that's a survival mechanism, but it is shame-based,
Yeah, I mean, the hidden in plain sight concept certainly was in our community when 60 Scoop was around and those generations that residential school was going around, and our families were saying, no, you need to identify as you're French, you're not Métis, or you're this or you're that. And it was more a survival, like what you said. But then over the years, it just got be so much easier for us just to stay hidden. And we had those reference points even, and just to ignore them for how many years. But now that hidden generation is moved away, and they tell us we're in the found generation now because we're finding who we are. And with that comes identity crises too. Yeah. Because what exactly are we at the end of the day? My journey may be different, but than yours and yours. But one common thing we have is that we're Métis and that we're there for one another, right?
And we've talked to a lot of people, Lawrence and I, and I'd say 90% of the time, the concept of sharing connection, people were told, well, just be quiet. Don't bring it up. Don't talk about it. But 5 or 10% occasionally, and it does surprise me. They say, I grew up Métis, kitchen parties every weekend. We wore our sash and ribbons. I'm like, wow, I don't hear that very often, but it tends to be a bit pocketed in areas, like certain areas of Saskatchewan, where the relationships were very close. And I've had people recently, even just looking at, the beautiful pin, and they go, well, are you allowed to wear that? Okay, now that I'm curious. Where's your question coming from? And it's beaded. Okay, that's the first part. Well, and it's a poppy. All right, well, sure, we're not at Remembrance Day, but can I remember whenever I want? But as a matter of fact, and I will use that as conversation. Yeah, I'm Métis. I feel very proud. I was very proud how this was given to me. And if the individual is, I'd like to ask a few more questions or talk. Or if they shake their head and go, well, I'm done with this conversation, right? You're not here to listen and have a conversation. When you work with those people who want to have conversation, I love sharing that. And I love learning, because I'm willing to make mistakes as well. But then you better have a pretty good understanding of explaining to me where I'm wrong. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on my own journey. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
For you here, like the Iniikokaan Centre, when the first time you brought me here, and there was community here smudging, and you can feel that positive energy, and it gives a place for people to try and ground themselves. Can you describe Bow Valley College and this relationship with this center itself? I feel when you walk up to those doors, it's comforting, and it feels like there's going to be positive energy here. But how did that develop, and how does it develop for you?
Well, it's such a beautiful question, and I really can't take credit for it. It's really the founders of the center and the initial conversations, prayers, and ceremonies that came from, this vision of a safe place for Métis people, for people who, wherever they are at. And, how I came to be in this place is that people have been very generous with their knowledge with me. They've invested a lot of time with me in terms of sharing, and I'm still learning. And so people have always met me where I'm at. And so I do try to meet people where they're at. And that's Indigenous students, non-Indigenous students, staff, faculty, leaders, because you don't know what you don't know. And it's a very interesting time. We're quite open-minded, and this is a safe space to talk about that. In saying that, the center does have a spirit. I've been told, I can feel it. We try to honor it with our staff. We specifically choose staff that can honor that spirit and carry that vision that was originally prayed for initially. So it's a great responsibility that I do not take lightly, to serve the staff and to serve the students, and just support their success as they define it.
But we've had conversations before, and you were very generous with providing me with a smudge bowl. Now, I don't imagine you order sage on Amazon. So I've got to, throw it out there. You've also participated in going to collect it. To me, that is something that I don't think people understand, of how you're connecting yourself with community, with agency, with the school, for example, by sharing your time for that. I totally respect that your answer before of, there's community builders who got there. But if there isn't somebody to help guide that along and continue to expound on those principles, we start to forget.
Yeah, I think for me, you kind of touched on it, when we work in Aboriginal or Indigenous organization, this is not just a representation of just Métis. There's First Nations, Treaty 7 relationship. And, because I've worked in that area too, and I've been gifted a few names and a few eagle feathers because of the service that you do in the community. And some of those things, like going out and getting medicines, is part of it. It's just who we are as Indigenous people. We service everybody, and we need to get all that stuff. Even though some Métis don't smudge, we still have to get that for the rest of everybody else, and share it as much as possible. And it's a heavy responsibility sometimes and that's why I'm sure the elders work with you, and they try to educate you, because they did that to me too. Because their belief is, if you're going to work and serve the community, you're going to have to hear our stories. You're going to have to go through our ceremony. You're going to have to do all those things in order for you to serve our people. And we trust you with that. So that's what they gave you that education and that connection for. And it's a gift. It's a real gift and honor. And since I've been working in Aboriginal organizations, when I stopped dancing in 97, I've never worked for a non-Indigenous agency. I've only worked for Aboriginal ones.
Nobody else would hire you.
Yeah.
And I think that
maybe.
But I think those are, when people are handed out that spiritual name, it's coming from a place from elders sharing, who want to connect, and they want you to feel connected with that. They want you to experience that awareness. And I think when we talk about it and explain to, it's our role to help carry that conversation right now from the elders down through to the youth, and then hopefully let the youth know it's okay to ask the questions too. You need to ask the questions, and we want our elders to have that shared connection. And I find that's one of the strengths of the Métis community. And our music is what brings us together, and it's that sense of connection. And I think this center celebrates that. Like it is beautiful, and it's welcoming. And thank you again. I can't thank everybody behind the scenes for how much they've welcomed us to this area. Let's jump on to an important commentary: truth and reconciliation. And we've touched on it, and I know we'll touch on it a little bit. It's almost like it catches up with you. There's a lot more conversations happening about the Indigenous people, and we have more days. We have, the September 30th, and we have Métis Week, and we had the loss of the Queen and that relationship. So there's a lot of conversations in residential schools. What do we have to do to keep that conversation going? Because I find what happens sometimes is somebody says, "Oh well, we acknowledged it. Yeah, but I don't think we can move forward too quickly. I think we need to continue to talk.
No, the truths are still coming out.
Okay, good point.
I've heard that people say we're in the reconciliation phase.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of are. We're on the first steps of that, but the truths are still coming out. And we have to wait for those to come out first before we go, oh, let's put this to bed, right? And that might take 7 generations.
You know what? That's a good point, Lawrence.
So, I mean, that's what the elders kind of say, and I agree to that. It might take a longer than what people think.
Yeah.
But there's going to be more truth being uncovered. You know, we thank Keisha Superno, one of our M&A members, doing a lot of the burial sites currently with the radar and everything. And we try to work with her as much as we can. And she's very heavy related to Region 3, and it's kind of nice that we can have that relationship. She comes down here whenever I need her. But like I said, the more truths that are going to come out eventually about the burial sites, and number one, what happened? Why are those students there? And the families have to reconnect, and there's all these things that have to happen. And then reconciliation. The efforts, in institutions, I think is going forward. Government especially is moving forward. Industry, I think they're starting to adapt to it. But really, I don't think there's a whole understanding in all 3 of those areas still. We as Aboriginal people know, but it's them on their end that need to understand further.
Well, but even me, that's such a great point. Do you have a lot of people who ask you, Michelle, about how the role of the school plays in truth and reconciliation? Like, does that come forward? Because Bow Valley has so much opportunity when it comes to funding for students and opportunities in creating centers like this. Is that part of the discussion that happens? The actual term truth and reconciliation, or?
I think that's a really good discussion. I think it's warranted, it's valuable, it's timely. There's a lot of discussion around it and what it actually means. What are the success measures? What are the return on investment even of reconciliation? I think that's a real conversation. Reconciliation action plans are really coming to the forefront. Economic development, student support, like across the board, right? And so, like when I even look at the SASH, and this comes from research from an academic and how we support specifically Métis post-secondary students is around the SASH. And so cultural support for my area is really just like a braid in it, right? And so it talks about addressing racism in the classroom, lateral violence, community integration, content, curriculum, so it's really very much a woven effort. And then I think if organizations and institutions kind of take that approach, then it's not housed under, well, you're fine because you have culture now. It's really addressing, as a framework in terms of how we approach and specifically address unique barriers. What I see coming down and what I'm hopeful for is the details around the impact. So while we're raising awareness of the history, let us not put that just in the past and say now we're aware of it, because it's a new conversation around, what does it look like in a contemporary context? How does intergenerational trauma show up in power dynamics with a classroom and teacher environment? Right? And so those are very specific in terms of trust, and so what is the impact on the Indigenous student and how do we navigate those systems? So they're very nuanced. It's quite complicated, but what I'm seeing is a lot more hiring. We're about to, hire for an Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation Director. That is a new position, and that is to oversee the indigenization strategy and to ensure that we're reporting back to a community in a good way. We have our entire lives. Every day is Orange Shirt Day here. Yeah. Every single day, and it weighs heavy. And so we're also having new conversations in terms of how do you support Indigenous staff who support Indigenous students? Yeah. Right? And so when we're looking at identity, we're also having these really constructive conversations.
Yeah. I think for me, and like you said, having a residential school or truth and reconciliation coordinator within as part of an Indigenous strategy or policy is important for all institutions. Because it shows us as Indigenous community that you're on the action plan, that you're not just developing a policy and walking away from that policy. You're actually implementing something that's tangible that we can see, right? And certainly Bow Valley College is doing that, then that's wonderful. Then we challenge all the other institutions across Canada to do the same.
Yeah, to meet the commitment that Bow Valley has given to community. And I know there's a lot of other institutions, we've talked about those, but here's one that's also invited us in. And as you've pointed out, creating a position. And I think, and it leads me to sometimes the conversation when it comes to land acknowledgements. And a lot of companies and a lot of agencies, oh, well, if you look at our website, there's down at the bottom, there's a little land acknowledgement. Yeah. Okay, but that doesn't mean you're done. That's just literally means you've actually heard that there is a conversation to be had. So the notion, and great point, we're still going to uncover the truth for a long time. And how do we look to have these in conversation? And I recently spoke to, it was 400 physicians, and they explained to me, and they don't just do a land acknowledgement. It's a different person every time, and that person also has to bring one new point of conversation, something that they've learned. That's fabulous. What a great way to ask for people to engage. But again, now you get to a larger institution and go, yeah, but look at all of the principles that we need to look at. There's a lot, but nobody expects you to solve it overnight. I think I just like to see that people are moving towards in a positive direction.
And when I do a land acknowledgement, I'll always talk about my connection to each nation during the land acknowledgement. I'm not just listing off the nations. I'm actually saying, oh, I sweated at Tsuut'ina Nation. I've done ceremony over here, and I've done this connection with that elder and this chief over here. And I make it more personable than what that land acknowledgement means to me personally. It's not about speaking on behalf of Region 3. I'm actually doing my protocol on the spot with whoever's there from those nations.
That's lovely. And you know what, that's the thing, is how do we keep the conversation going? And that is a really good example of collaboration. Like, it must be in collaboration. So once a month we try to get together with the other institutions to, what are your best practices, communities of practice, right? Organization, lots of things are happening that we don't talk about, which is great, because then it's for the right reasons, right?
Right.
And so I think that's through collaboration, that's through acknowledgement of each other in relationships, because that's how we came to be, right? Is that, and that's why it's so diverse, even the Métis experience, from what I've come to love about the culture, is the diversity even within Métis Nation, the different dialects, the different languages, understandings, practices, and that we get to all learn together. And you said it today, prior to the podcast, is, there's always something to learn from everyone. And so I think that if we're walking in that way, then it can't help but get better.
I got a question for both of you. The Métis relationship and education. Both of you have roles, politically, here academically, and Rupert's Land, for example. So where do the students, what's the priority for students and those relationships when it comes to education?
Well, I mean, for me, we invest in our future, and those students are our future. They're the future leaders. It'll all be reciprocal at some point, come back to the nation. So we support them as best we can. The Métis Scholar Awards that we develop alongside institutions like Bow Valley, I was involved in, Corey McCowan when he was fundraising on behalf of Bow Valley, and we're setting up on our end, and Lisa Saville and Lauren Gladue on Rupert's Land end, is that we found the dollars, and now there's a pot of money that's here for Métis scholars, and we feel that that's important, because that's the first initial step. And once they get into school, then we know who they are. We know what their family situations are. We know all those things at home that we can kind of help them through, if they need housing, if they need anything like that, or more support when M&A has something available, then it's available for those students on automatic, rather than us having to search for them, right? That they're always there. And we feel that pertains to more success. The more we take care of our people, society kind of changes and adapts. We're trying to create that teaching for everybody across the land, is that if you work for the Métis Nation, here's your responsibility, is to take care of the home, take care of their home, them as well as their home, as much as possible, and support them.
And I think we need to be a part of, that's part of the Squeaky Wheel, is to bring forward those conversations, to ask people who have that experience, that knowledge, and who are willing to share. Because you're sharing, at the start of our conversation, a personal journey. And that's not easy for everybody. So can you give me a little bit of your perspective on the sense of that, the students and the Métis, and are we helping guide them to where there's funding opportunities to ensure that they get through?
That's a really good question. Funding is one of the biggest barriers, of course, for all Indigenous students. We've heard from students, they're very complex, diverse situations. So we have unique positions to support them in that way. But funding is huge. It could mean buying a textbook or feeding your children. And that's the kind of, it could mean choosing to go to class at the risk of not learning anything because you're so hungry, right? And so these are very real circumstances that I think we have to acknowledge. And so that's why I think funding is really good, especially support, right? So I myself am a graduate student right now, so I'm in my last year. And I have, somebody from Rupert's Land reach out to me and say, how are you doing? Are you finding balance? Is there any support that you need? So I was learning Blackfoot language at the time, and I got a Blackfoot tutor because of that support. So these are very specific things, and I am excited to see more investment in graduate studies as well from the nation, because when we get into leadership positions, when we get at the table and we're invited, then we can make the changes. No longer is it sufficient just to get a job. It is, to make differences for our community. We know the research shows that education is a social determinant of health and wellness, lifestyle, even how long you live is comparative and uniquely integrated into how educated you are. So if we're looking at sustainability of a culture and a people's, we're investing in the right area in terms of education. So students, it is very difficult, and they're so brave, and our students are just so inspiring, awe-inspiring, and every single day I get to learn from them, especially my staff. So it is that reciprocity in terms of our college is very unique by the makeup of the students. We have about 370 self-identified Indigenous students per semester. And our, and we work to support them in very invested ways, just as the nation does. And so what I'm really impressed about for Rupert's Land is there's Métis content and educators creating content to put in the classroom. So, and it makes it we could have Métis Jeopardy up here tomorrow because of those programs and that, all of those resources available. Like, it's just a pick of the litter, right? And so it's just really beautiful that our nation makes it so easy to share about our peoples, our experience, and just create awareness, and we're all for the better.
If I was to take any of the classes that you've taken, could I have all your notes and could you help me pass? Or is that's probably not. I
mean, I did take Intro to Stretching once. It is a class. Yeah. Because
I don't want to read Lawrence's old notes. I don't think I'd do very well if I had to try and borrow his notes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the elders always talk about land-based learning, and we learned that when I was a kid. I had an uncle that would bring us out on the land because he said, that's a better classroom. I got a lot more out of here than I did in that behind those gray walls, right? And that sort of goes in a lot of our Indigenous people. And we always say curriculum has to be sort of kinesthetic, learning with our hands and more hands-on. And especially taking us out and learning what plants do and how animals behave affects nature and balance, and we need to respect that as Indigenous people. And so, that's something that we learn. We try to encourage that in curriculum as much as possible. There's only one area that Rupert's Land has sort of, been cast aside in terms of curriculum develop, and that's certainly Alberta Ed and our school, right? And we had a working group all ready to go with recommendations on curriculum in the draft and from K to 12, and they decided to go with something else, and that's more political than anything. But now we hit them at the post-secondary, but we're going to continue to do that until those things change from K to 12.
I was at an event last night, and there was a talking circle, and it was very engaging. And this is, as you talk about kinetic and learning from the people that you're connecting with. And as the smudge goes around and the sage is burning, everybody allows the smoke to come onto them differently. And you watch that. And if you're a student, if you're a youth and you've never participated in something, how would you know how to even get involved? So again, you don't always have to do something, but when you feel comfortable, and that's the thing I really try to promote, just go and attend. It's very unlikely anybody's going to say you can't. But when you feel comfortable, when you finally decide, I'm interested, and I would watch. Some people would wash their hands in the smoke, or one lady had taken her ring off. And a lot of people will bathe themselves, and bring it to their heart. But if you don't even see it, how do you learn? And to me, that seems like something that is almost easy to learn. But if it's something you've never done, it's almost fearful. How would you get involved? Is it even allowable? So I think that's why, we need the guidance. We need people who are willing to help get our students that opportunity to experience it. And to all of our students who are listening out there, and I hope you're enjoying and paying attention and haven't gone back to Facebook, that you see that this is a safe space. Come and ask. You can always email Lawrence and I, right? We're always willing to. We always appreciate when you participate. And we're still on this journey. I know I'm on this journey too.
Yeah, and I think for me, in terms of ceremonial teachings, I never got explained anything. Because elders believe that you need to open your heart to the teachings. And sometimes they can fragment, by letting you know this is what smudging means. What they say is they open that door first, come on in, just start observing how we do it and follow along. And then we'll give you a teaching, and that's the way they kind of believe, right? They wouldn't give you a class before you walk in or a handout.
Interesting.
Here's what a smudge is. They just immerse you into it.
Yeah.
And you yourself have to open your heart to that ceremony. And then eventually you'll get the teachings, because you'll sit down with an elder and you can ask them.
Yeah.
What does a smudge mean? What does that represent? And they'll tell you, right?
Yeah.
But they won't do it on the spot. Some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find you get asked a lot? The questions being in Iniikokaan, what is acceptable, or asked to maybe help, convey some of the teachings? How does that work for you here?
Oh, that's such a good question, because I think the most often we get the question of, how do I start? Where do I start?
Yeah.
Where do I go? Right? I don't even know what I don't know. So, and which is a very, appropriate place to start. And so that natural curiosity of opening your heart, just like you said, and, really asking. So increasing competency in cultural protocol, I think, is something that's really essential in cultural support, especially for students, because so we have a number of different opportunities. There's many ways to learn, one of which is watching. And so we have opportunities for people to just come and watch. Every morning we have, every Monday morning we have breakfast for the students, a hot breakfast. And then we also have a smudge and a teaching with Anastasia Kopi, which is Elder Keith Chiefmoon. And so he actually talks about his educational journey. He's one of the first Indigenous peoples to graduate from University of Lethbridge. So you can imagine the first day he showed up, they said, "You don't belong here." And that was his welcome to post-secondary. And so since then, he's gotten multiple degrees, and he talks about how he's used the smudge to get him through those classes and to get him through that experience. And he always prays and sings for the students, and that's a good start. And then we have, Alice Kakwitz from Yithka Nagoda, and she talks about the smudge, and she talks, she brings her family and talks about it. We have Edmé Comstock, and, we only had a seagull feather, and I said, Edmé, I'm sorry, we only have the seagull feather here. And she said, when I was in the bush, you use what you have, and that's a teaching, right? That's a teaching. And so we can see different ways of doing it. And I think the students, I can feel them. I know that the people who come in, they're starting to practice. They're starting to use that in their daily lives. And I didn't use that when I was a student, and I was exposed to it in university as well. So now it's a part of my daily practice. And, not everybody does it, but I found that it works for me. And so I want them to see me offer tobacco and turn red and be embarrassed. I want them to see me get corrected in a very, healthy, loving way, is because comfort is not a prerequisite for reconciliation and reconnection.
Yeah. I think this is the kind of place where I feel anybody can walk in and ask a question, right? This is we talk about academics, we talk about school, that you can ask anything. And I'm sometimes worried because the world seems to be changing, even universities. Well, you can't really say that. But again, walking into this institution, when it comes to wanting to ask questions about the Indigenous community, ask questions specific to your own personal journey, your own personal community, the Iniikokaan Centre. And again, I'm not here. I'm not on any boards. I'm here because we were welcomed. And this is our 100th. This is a huge celebration. 100 times I've been trying to kick Lawrence off, and 100 times he keeps showing up, and the podcast keeps going, and 100 times he hasn't fired me. So for some reason, we're still together, Lawrence. I haven't figured it out.
Yeah, well, you need Métis content. Without me, I don't know.
I guess without you, and for all of our listeners, it's funny. Lawrence and I talk about this all the time. I tease him. He was a ballet dancer, and I'm like, Métis. Lawrence. Well, that's exactly it. It's not really Métis. And here's the thing, and we talk about it. I have my own band, Memphis and the Grand, and I know our listeners have heard it, and we're doing really well. We have songs on the radio, but I'm a Métis artist. And as much as I'm trying to learn more about playing Métis music, that's its own journey. Here I'm on one side, I'm rock and roll and country, and then on the other there's the Métis, and it's like, does the artist make the music, or does the culture make the artist? And you were still a Métis ballet dancer, whether you liked it or not. But you're right. There's not really unless
Métis ballet, no.
Folks, if any of you come up with a Métis ballet, all we're asking is 50% of the ownership rights of any of that, so that Lawrence and I can benefit from that.
They have to pay for parking.
Michelle, and I hope it's okay, because I'd love to use that analogy before. You'll often talk about pyramids, how things work here, but and where the relationship is. But the notion that the wovenness into a sash, we only represent one piece of that, and the sash represents so much more. There's so much more happening in here that it brings together. And I was gifted this Saskatchewan sash when I was emceeing up at Métissage, and Lawrence was like, well, where'd you get that one from? Because there's only so many places that make the sashes, and we've talked many times that the difference in colors and east and west, and now there's pride sashes, and to me it's about that you recognize you can tie back to the culture, tie back to yourself, but also be expressive. I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, whenever we present a sash, we usually say you're now interwoven into our community. It's an honor to receive a sash, and then we go on to the next student and we say the exact same thing. But what it means is that you're acknowledging it, that this is what your ancestors were a part of, and you're receiving your first sash, and now you're coming back, right? But this community will never leave. We're interwoven in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll find your own way, but here's a place you're grounded. Yeah, you're, and we want people to feel as though that this is home and this is a space for them.
Yeah, the sashes look different back then, but because just like Edmie said, they used what they needed, and this wasn't the standard color for every Métis sash in the 1800s, right? They just used the cloth, whatever color cloth they could get.
And this would end up being a long topic, and that's not my intent, but I really want to recognize, and I think it's important that we recognize that October 4th, which just passed, is the National Day of Action for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. And we've talked about it before, that there is, a display, I think it's outside of Prince George, the acknowledgement. And I know, Lawrence, we've talked, there's a history.
Well, I grew up in Prince George, so I know,
Yeah. And that's where your ballet essentially started. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then working in the downtown east side, I met many families who were looking for
families, and it's hard for us to understand that, but I think it's so important, and I want to recognize again that these conversations are happening. We are finding the truths that are still happening, and somehow our relationship with the Indigenous communities and Canada's role, and how do we try and build this. I just wanted to express that this day is here. And this day will happen as we move forward. So
that's really beautiful. The staff and students did walk over to City Hall, and we participated in the march. And it's when we gather in community, it's just so powerful, right? And so when we hear, specifically there was the Turning Robe Drum group, as well as, women singing and drumming and, wearing the red and recognizing and honoring and, pictures of family members. And, I think the difference is that day it's a different experience for many different people, right? And so the acknowledgement and the recognition is there, and I think, it's so beautiful to see like government recognize that and things like that. But we recognize these things because they're part of our daily lives, like when we lose somebody in our family, like that's not just October 4th. We remember it. We remember every time, there's a holiday, every Saturday that we called our sister, things like that. And so, there are different experiences, and just creating space to participate in ways that we're ready, while having mental health support as well while we participate. That's very important here. Our panels, you might see, a panel of allyship during March Awareness Month, rather than, residential school survivors, not because it's better or worse, just because it could be quite extractive. And so how are we supporting elders and students and engaging Indigenous peoples in these conversations? Are we gifting them honorarium? Are we following protocol? Even because if we work in spaces that have Indigenous content, it doesn't mean that you can sidestep the protocol to engage. Right, especially students. Many of our students are ceremonialists, language speakers. If we as a world recognize that traditional knowledge, they would automatically be PhDs. Yeah,
and Orange Shirt Day is another example of protocol. And our worry in the community, because it's such a new event for all of us, is how much protocol is actually being involved. And some of those celebrations, or they call them celebrations sometimes, but those events that really weren't connected to us, what's going to happen to the elders that they invite, or the people that they ask to tell their truth? Are there counselors there? Are there honorarium available? Like all these things, because we're the ones who field those complaints as a nation, right? When after the fact. And at that time we can't really do much, but thank God we haven't heard too much lately. But Orange Shirt Days is just another example. Every time there's an event or some type of ceremony or celebration, it's really vital for whoever's inviting them to take care of those people that they're inviting.
Yeah. And my friend Ann Harding always says, do something. I can never be too critical about efforts towards reconciliation, because, it's an effort. It's a collective effort. It's, I'm wearing my shirt and this means something. It's semiotics, within society. And so I'm grateful for that. And it creates the space to ask curious questions and have those conversations, and a little bit more space to say, well, what is the Métis perspective? And engage, our politicians respectfully and say, for me, people often say, well, what is the Métis perspective? And I say, I'll give you Michelle's perspective. I don't represent anybody, right? And it's really important that, we engage, people specifically who are honored in that way to represent us. And so that's, it's such a pleasure to have you here and really connect in this way, because, when I was 14, I got my card and I didn't know what that meant. And, I think I met you when I was very, very young. And so it was just like leaders in our own community that I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing, right? And so I think at one point there was an opportunity to talk with, you and the nation president. And I thought, and I just started to cry because oh my gosh, I'm in my own community and I can contribute. And it's just so special, right? So, and that happened because of a center like this.
Yeah. I think we're going to hit our time here right away, and I can't say thank you enough for everybody who's listening. The Blue Jays are going to be hopefully making it into the playoffs. I hope Bow Valley for Métis Week has mittens, because it always tends to be a little bit cold. And I know you guys participate a lot, and you have some great people who've been very generous to us and connecting us. And Michelle, you've done everything. The president, Lawrence Gervais, myself, the captain, we can't say thank you enough. Like this, for inviting us to the center, for connecting us, for your behind the scenes group that has put this together. It means the world to us. And we're Lawrence and I like to think that if we weren't helping with steer this conversation and get it out, we get further behind. People are just not finding those, but we find great people who are willing to share that story. So from all of us here at the Squeaky Wheel, do you want to close this out today?
Yeah, well, actually, I want to thank everybody for viewing in. 100 episodes. That's
that's a good point. We should bring that up.
It's a lot of work. Not many people reach 100 or even 20 or 30. So budgeting is, and we acknowledge Métis Nation support as well as I do believe. Now I'm forgetting all our sponsors. Friendship Center, as well as
Memphis Group, and all the small agencies
that's right.
that participate and help us. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we want to thank everybody. And when this first started, it was all about COVID and spreading awareness around COVID. And we just threw Métis culture in there as much as possible. But of course, when that pandy started to dwindle down, we just kept things going and going and going. So
now my tagline usually at the end, Michelle Fournie, is to keep the wheel squeaking. I would like you to share that one to the audience. This is Michelle coming live, in a way, from Bow Valley College.
Keep the wheel squeaky?
That works for me. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Merci.
Merci. The Squeaky Wheel is brought to you by the Squeaky Wheel Company, co-hosted by the President, Lawrence Gervais, from M&A Region 3, and the Captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun. Our program is broadcast from Calgary, in Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, which is part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We also acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of Treaty 7, Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. You can always reach us for comment about our programming by email at tsw@thesqueakywheel.ca or find us on our website, www.squeakywheel.ca, and our socials. For our comments, it is our focus to recognize all of our First Nations and Indigenous friends, share connection with Métis settlements, and listen to and show respect to our Métis brothers and sisters and families. Here at the Squeaky Wheel, we give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for her time she allows us to be here and share her bounty. From all of us at the Squeaky Wheel, Tansi.